Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone's Christmas was great. I know mine was. My kids were very happy, and that's all that really matters. Anyway, today I've got a couple of Dogman encounters that I'd love to share with you. Before we get into these encounters, a couple of links I've got to share. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel continue to grow and go. I also have a second channel, which is for creepypasta, fanfiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that don't really fit on this channel, but I love to do. Now, if that's anything that you're into, follow that link below and give them a listen. You may just like them. Now, these Dogman encounters are terrifying, but in a couple of days, I've got a reptilian man encounter that I'm going to be sharing with you guys from Pennsylvania. I'm communicating with the individual right now who is having multiple encounters, and each communication between us makes me more excited to share with you guys. I know you guys are going to love it because it absolutely creeps me out to no end. And with that, guys, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with these Dogman encounters, shall we? Today's first Dogman encounter comes from northern Michigan. This is true what I'm about ready to describe to you. On November 24th, 2010, me and two of my friends went out at night around 12 a.m. We weren't hunting, but we had weapons. We were looking for a spot to set up our blinds for muzzleloading season when we came across the field with tons of deer bedding. We came into another field with none whatsoever. We continued through this field and came across some kind of game trail. We decided to venture down this trail into the woods. We got maybe 300 yards back in it and started hearing heavy breathing and snapping sounds in the thick brush to our right. We thought maybe coyotes, but we got to the corner and we stopped in our tracks. In front of us, maybe 60 yards away, was something blacker than the woods standing on 2 feet and stood between 6'8" and 7'4". We slowly turned away and backtracked. Before we got to the field, the same thing was in front of us again. We turned around for a second and turned back and it was gone. When we got into the field, we noticed there were 4 more of these creatures, one on each corner of the field just standing there. We saw one move halfway behind the tree. At this point, we're freaking out. We made our way through the field and got to the edge, and there was one standing directly in the middle of the trail entering the woods. We hauled butt back home, and the whole way we felt like we were being watched and stalked. We've been out every night since then. We have learned do not use lights because it comes closer than 60 yards. The closest it's been to me was maybe 25 yards and was moving closer. At that point, I shot at it. There were 5 total that we saw the first night, and after I shot at one. We went out last night, and there were only 4, and they seemed more aggressive. In the field, it seems they tried herding us into a corner. You don't have to believe this encounter, but on all of my morals, I stand by what I say, and I know it is true. Please, everyone, be careful venturing out into the woods, especially at night. Today's second Dogman encounter comes from Upper Michigan as well. Last fall, my son and I were driving on US 41 M28 towards 3 lakes in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. This beast ran across the highway near Tioga Creek. We're familiar with all the animals living here. Moose regularly cross in front of drivers, so we watched the sides of the roads carefully. We're very puzzled and thought it might be some sort of mutant wolf and could not figure out what we witnessed. It ran fairly fast, about 50 feet in front of the truck. It was so strange because the front was much higher up than the back of a larger wolf. The side view of the animal was almost like an ape shape, with the front legs longer than the back legs, which made it run funny. It ran like a bear runs, with the exception of the back legs being shorter, if you can picture that. The front angle of what I saw looked like it had a very wide chest. The head appeared wolf-like, but definitely not a wolf. The color was brown and black mixed. The hair seemed medium long, like a wolf, and I remember thinking it might have had mange. Must have had patches of missing hair. I was telling my son, who is 13, about what I had encountered, and he gave the same description. How very strange and out of place it was. He said that this spring he saw the same type of thing on a logging road near our house. I do remember him telling me that at the time, and it was roughly around the same time. He was riding his dirt bike. We live in a very extreme, remote area, and it ran across the trail. I know where he's talking about because I pick berries there and do get a weird feeling like something's watching me. The neighbor told me that this area is Bigfoot Central, which I don't know or believe, but after doing further research today, there have been a lot of reports of strange creatures in this area that go many, many years back. Who knows what it is, but as long as it's not hunting anything or hurting anything, I hope it is left alone. I'm very familiar with the wildlife. I do not hunt and know my tracks. I've not seen any strange tracks, but now I'll really keep my eyes open. Today's third and final Dogman encounter. This one comes from Wisconsin. My girlfriend and I went out to feed the deer for hunting opener on November 22nd, 2008. We were in a national forest in northern Wisconsin. It was November 21st, 2008, and the time was roughly 12 a.m. It was totally dark out, and a light snow was falling, with accumulation of about an inch covering the roads. The temperature was about 11 degrees, and the wind was blowing from the northwest with a chill of 0. We made a U-turn to the left onto an unfinished ATV trail in our 4x4 heading towards last year's speed pile. I got to the bottom of the hill and backed in and parked. I got out my pistol and loaded it. I then put it in my holster. I grabbed my headlamp and 3 LED bulbs and secured it on my head. I handed her a shaker LED flashlight and proceeded to back of my truck where I had a 5-gallon bucket with just under 2 gallons of corn and apples in it, strapped down with 2 of my ATV straps. I put down the tailgate, unstrapped the bucket, and put the tailgate back up. I walked around the side and then the front of the truck to her passenger side where she was putting on her gloves. We both started walking together, her just behind and to my right side, when we both noticed a set of fresh tracks in the snow, heading downwind of us in the same direction we were walking. At first, it was not the size that caught my attention. It was what in God's creation made these tracks. Immediately, my skin crawled as I looked around with my head to see if what we just had come up on was in sight. I glanced back down in disbelief at the tracks. I was in a slight stage of shock as I looked at her and she looked at me, and we both looked down at 4 well-formed footprints of some kind of scary tracks that either of us had never seen before. I sized my shoe beside one of the tracks and realized it was about 3 inches longer than my shoe, which measures 12 inches heel to toe, and about an inch wider than my shoe, which measures 4 inches at the widest part. Whatever we witnessed the footprints of had 2 pointed talons on the end of its foot, and was isometrically the same with the rectangular shaped heel. The talons joined on the outside and the same length in between the talons of each foot. They had to be 15 inches long and 5 inches wide with 64-inch strides. I have a 36-inch stride at 5'10", to give an idea of the possible size of this creature. Running or not, we do not know. I believe we just missed seeing what caused these tracks, and whatever made these tracks was still in the area, possibly watching us. My girl told me to load my pistol and keep it out. I told her it was already loaded and did not argue. At first she wanted to leave right away, but the sheer adrenaline and interest of what caused these tracks, I believe, was what kept us there. I said, okay, let's get out of here, but again, interest kept us looking at the tracks. My fear slightly subsided enough to think about the upcoming deer opener and decided I have a pistol and we'll be okay. I started to walk the same way the tracks went up the hill and on the trail when I stopped and looked back at her while she was still staring down at the prints. I said, come on, let's get this over with. She caught up to me as we walked together. She said to me, if this thing gets a hold of me, put a bullet in my head. I thought about that as we kept walking. We went down into the woods, down a steep hill where I knew the feed pile was from last year. We got to where I wanted the pile to be. I took a lid off the bucket and dumped out the corn and apples and stepped on the apples. I snapped on the lid of the bucket and said, let's go. We started to climb up the hill when I realized we were off the track and had to walk left to reach the trail to get back to the truck. I started to think that this was the scariest thing I've ever encountered and felt panic overcoming me. I knew where I was, and finally we got back to the trail and walked down to where we could see the tracks of the creature again. We both stared at them for 5 minutes or so. When we got back to the truck just 20 yards from the prints, she got in and closed her door. I went behind the truck, opened the tailgate, and restrapped the bucket down and closed the tailgate. I got to the back side of my truck and took out the clip of my gun and got in. I threw off my headlamp and we drove away thinking, I'm not coming back here. And she looked at me and said, I agree. We were both scared and couldn't believe what had just happened. It was a month later, or earlier, and 1.1 miles walking through the woods from where we had witnessed those tracks, that a different friend and I were camping. I went to bed early and fell asleep to a deep sleep. I woke up to a sound of my friend walking behind the tent, and my first reply was, what are you doing back there? I woke up a little more and realized my friend was sleeping, breathing kind of loud next to me. I sat up against my gear and grabbed my pistol and flashlight and sat there cold and scared in the dark. I woke my friend up and told him what I could hear, and he said, it's probably a deer or something. The temperature was around 26 degrees. I looked out the flaps of the tent and could see the fire had died down, and it was dark out there. I stood up and told my friend that I was going to the truck to warm up and get some sleep. I asked him if he wanted me to leave the pistol, and he said, no, I'll be all right. I left the tent and walked to my truck about 80 yards away and started it up to get warm. I turned my lights on for a few different times to see if what had walked behind the tent was in sight. I didn't see anything. I turned my truck off and I fell asleep. Whatever walked up to the tent was bipedal and made 2 steps into the sound range and out again. I did not hear any other noise from whatever walked by. I looked around the next morning for footprints, but the leaves covered the ground and I didn't detect anything. A little more than 2 years earlier, it was summer and I was at the same location riding my ATV alone. I stopped and got off walking down the nearby lake and was looking at the water and how clear it was when I could hear up the hill above something snapped off the trees. I got back on my ATV quickly at this time, thinking it was a bear or a buck was up there, and I was not sticking around to find out what it was. 2 months later that summer, I returned to the same spot riding my ATV. I shut off the wheeler and stood around close by thinking about last time I was there. I was scared off by something. I was there about 5 minutes when all of a sudden I could hear branches snapping off the trees again, as whatever was breaking those branches was coming down the hill closer to where I was. I got on my wheeler, never to return until my friend and I camped there a little over 2 years, later in October. My first 2 experiences with this creature, well, while I was alone, made me think that it was possibly a bear or a buck deer. Trouble with this theory is that I have come up on a bear a dozen or so times, and every time the bear is running as fast as it can in the other direction, and whatever was making the tree sounds was not running anywhere. A deer also runs away, first presence of a human. Now that we witness these creatures' footprints, I put the puzzle pieces together and realize this creature is living in this area, and it has probably been here for a long, long time. I have learned this creature means us no harm yet. It only makes a sound when I'm alone breaking tree branches. It has always been downwind of me or my girlfriend or friend. It is out in the day and or at night. It waits until we are vulnerable to approach us when the 2 of us are together. I could possibly have smelled it and didn't know what I smelled. I or we have put 4,000 miles in this forest on my grizzly ATV, deep, desolate, thick wooded swamp lake areas, and have now proved to ourselves this undocumented time this creature in fact is out here. I know where this creature is living and plan an expedition to prove its existence. I want to document this creature because I feel everyone that enters the forest has the right to know that there is some sort of creature out here. Well, there you go, guys. 3 amazing encounters. The first 2, a visual. The last one, just definitely hearing and knowing something's there and a visual on the footprints. Now, the size of the footprints and him describing it just sent shivers up my back. Being in the woods alone or being in the woods with your girlfriend or wife is definitely scary because, you know, if you're by yourself, you've got to protect yourself, but if you're with your significant other, you've got to protect them too. And no one wants anything to happen to their significant other. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. I know I don't. Anyway, I really enjoyed these encounters, especially the first one. I liked all of them. The last one was great as well, but just the first one for some reason was just, I don't know, 5 Dogman circling a field you're in. Get out. I mean, really? Get out. I wouldn't even gone back, but they did. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed these stories, and like I said, I'm working on some right now amazing encounters. I'm sorry the uploads haven't been regularly. They were before Christmas, but it's the Christmas vacation and my children are home, so it's a lot of quality time spent with them. But next week I will be putting out a video a day. And with that, guys, I bid you farewell.